relates to sociology. Culture relates to psychology. Now, once we start to work that, economics, politics, and culture will be on our way. It has to work for us as individuals. It has to work for us as family units. It has to work for us as extended families. It has to work for us as organizations and communities. It has to work for us as strategic territorial states and nation states. But we got to have a science. Now, Dr. Jeffries, you say a science of economics, a science of politics, a science of culture? Yes. These are things we already developed. These are things we brought forth and gave to the world. That is at the heart of African culture, which is our great gift to the world. We gave the world culture and civilization. Africans didn't wait in the darkness for Europeans to bring the light, for Arabs to bring the light, for Chinese people to bring the light. Africans conceived of the possibility of developing the light, and they developed it in a very scientific way. They developed economics. The river valley civilizations of the Nile, that's why we have to reclaim them. That's where high culture and civilization was perfected by our people, not for a weekend, not for a month or two or a year, but you're talking about 5,000 to 6,000 to 7,000 years. Before anybody in Europe could read or write, African civilization was thousands of years old. But something has happened so that the knowledge of who and what we are and what we have been and what we can be is such that we're waiting for white folks to do for us. If you have a science of economics, and the Nile forced Africans to have it, because if the Nile is going to overflow every year, then you better get out of the way with the overflow and move to higher ground. So you began to study the movement of the river as it rises, and you began to relate that to the heavenly bodies, and you began to see a cluster of stars here when that Nile starts to rise, and then a cluster of stars here when the Nile overflows, and then a cluster of same cluster of stars there when after several months the Nile goes back to its banks and you plant a crop, and then within a period of time that cluster of stars here, and then you have your crop. So the African began to develop a science related to the ecology of the earth with the movement of the heavenly bodies. And so circumstances and conditions forced us into a science of economics. A European had difficulty doing that with his circumstances because the European, when you talk about the African river valley civilizations and the Afro-Asiatic peoples in Asia that developed river valley civilizations, and Asian peoples in China that developed it, and then the lakes and rivers of Central and South America, all around the Sun Belt you had peoples of color developing their river valley civilizations with economics at its heart. And if you have a powerful economics, you need a management of that. Especially if you have a Nile Valley civilization that stretches along 1,000 miles of the Nile, you've got to have that Nile coordinated and related in a political process so that you don't have somebody blocking the Nile at a certain particular point, and you develop a communal, cooperative, and collective spiritual development around use of the Nile. European couldn't do those type of things because for thousands of years, the way we were is an article in Newsweek, November the 10th, 1986, Our Ice Age Heritage, Language, Art, Fashion, and the Family. And there he is, a European caveman. See you all way in the back. I tell you all, you ain't going to be able to see everything I got to show now. As a caveman, he's been cleaned up. He looks like a cleaned up caveman Robert Redfoot. He got he's got seemingly African jewelry, but that's a caveman jewelry done by a caveman Sergio Valenti. And he got a nice little fur outfit. But the interesting thing in terms of values and images is that you just got the caveman. Where's his cave lady? A year or so later, they had a Newsweek that had the earliest peoples, and they did have the image of a black man and black woman on the cover. The only problem was they had them so light with jerry curls that it just didn't make no sense. But you can't expect white folks to do the images correctly. But they had to acknowledge that the first peoples on the planet were African people.